Previous shirim on this week's parsha are from 2 years ago, Living the Dream, from last year, The Bigger Picture, Part 2, and also there's a shir on Hanukkah, which some of you might have missed because it's not under the Hanukkah category for some reason, and that is 3 Strikes Against the Soul, which I recorded a version of that when I was in New York, so look that up, that's on Hanukkah. Okay, so tonight's shir we mentioned was in memory of Yehuda ben Hirsch. Let me explain to you who was Yehuda ben Hirsch. That was Mr. Julius Hambling, who unfortunately passed away yesterday, and the Lavoya was today. He was a man who was an outstanding Jew. I do not say this lightly. It's not just my opinion. This is an opinion that is very widely known. He was he was a classic Baal Teshuvah. Because he made a decision when he was in his youth to return back to the ways of Yiddishkeit, not that he was very far anyway, he wanted to become a little bit more from. You see now he has grandchildren, and if I'm not mistaken, he's got at least one great-grandchild. Unbelievable. He's produced generations of fine Yidden. Unbelievable. I had the zechus. I want to say one quick thing about him. I had the zechus once to spend quite a considerable amount of time with him because I was called. There was a levaya somewhere in Chesant or one of the Batei Kvaros that was quite far away, and they put out a posting on one of the email groups saying if anyone has time to go and make up a minyan for this levaya. So okay, it was during the day, so I was available, so I went, and I got a call from somebody who said, "Would you mind taking this man, Mr. Hambling?" I said, "Okay, no problem." So he came with me, and it should have been maybe half an hour to 45 minutes in the car. Because of unbelievable traffic, we were in the car on the way there for probably about 2 hours. And if I tell you, not a moment went by when I could say, "Oh, I'm fed up, I'm bored," because we were talking. He told me his life story and how he used to work for All Abroad, the charity that deals with the like a charity shop, and how he started off them selling furniture, and now it's unbelievable what he was saying. And he was such a good neshama, I can't tell you. And unfortunately he suffered from something very recently, and he deteriorated very quickly. But up until then, he was in very good health, Baruch Hashem. Always a smile on his face, always happy to do a mitzvah, never complaining. It was the furthest thing from his mind to complain. So for sure, we want to dedicate this shir in his memory, Yehuda ben Hirsch. And as Sephardim, we sometimes say that the mother's name, so Yehuda ben Hirsch v'Rivka, Baruch Hashem Tenachem Gan Eden, Hashem should give him a lichtige Gan Eden and should give a nechama to his family. Yehi Zichro Baruch, his memory should be upheld in this world, and he should earn a bigger Gan Eden than he has now. Even, if we can down here, we can push him up higher and higher. Okay. Now, I also Baruch Hashem had a bit of good news this week. And my mother had a bit of good news this week because my brother, Rav Natanel, in Yerushalayim, his daughter had a baby girl. So that means thank you. That means my brother, who's 3 years younger than me, is now a grandfather, which is I'm still getting my head around that, and that means I'm a great uncle as well. So Baruch Hashem, that Hashem has brought us to this moment where we can see the Dor Shlishi, the third generation. It's incredible. Hashem b'chol leiva b'sod yeshrim v'eidah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this week's parasha, maybe a little bit about Hanukkah as well. I've got a couple of stories. Like I normally say, you never know what part of the Shia I'm going to put the stories in, so you'll have to listen. Okay? You never know. Right. Vayhi Mikeitz shnatayim yamim uparo cholem. And it was at the end of 2 years that Pharaoh had a dream. And we all know this dream. It's a dream about the 7 cows, etc. We've talked about this in previous years. I don't want to go into the dream now, but I want to tell you something that I heard unusual about this pasuk. What does it mean, Mikeitz shnatayim, the end? We know the normal word for end is sof. Vahi misof shnatayim yamim. And it was at the end. What's this word, kates? So kates, we are told, kates means an end, like a full stop, a point in time. This is the end. And it is referring to one thing and one thing alone, and that is the end of Yosef's imprisonment. So what happens? On the face of it, I'll tell you what happens, and then I'll tell you that it's not like what I'm saying. So let me tell you what it's not like, and then I'll tell you what it is like. Okay? On the face of it, it seems Pharaoh has a dream. He gets all confused and verfunzelt, as they say in Yiddish, and he doesn't know what to do. He's calling his magicians. He's calling this one, that one. He's calling up the psychologists and the dream agencies, and he's googling dreams, and who knows what he's doing. In the end, he gets a tip-off. Oh, there's a Jew in prison. There's a little Jew boy in prison. He interpreted the dream for me once. Give him a try, You've tried everything else. It can't hurt. So they slap him out. So it seems like the dream happened, and because of that, Joseph gets freed. And then you see his ascent happens from that point. So I'll tell you that's not the case. And it's all linked with the word kates, because it was decreed in Shamayim, in heaven, that Yosef would be released from prison, and through that's why Pharaoh had the dream. Not Pharaoh had the dream, and because of that, Joseph was released. It's because it was the end of Joseph, his period in prison, and because of that, Hashem said, okay, let's do the dream. Cue dream, as they say in the film industry, And the Beis HaLevi says that this is a very fundamental machshava, a thought that we must have in our daily lives. In that, a person mustn't think that cause happens and then effect happens. Because it happens that something is decreed in Shamayim, and then other circumstances are decreed by Hashem that bring about what Hashem wants. For instance, if somebody, let's say, God forbid, somebody loses his life in a very unusual way, and there might be people who might be involved in this person's death, and they might beat themselves up and say, it was my fault. If I would not have done this, then this death would never have happened. If I would have been there 2 seconds earlier, I could have saved him. If I would have left the building and taken him with me 2 minutes earlier, he would have been saved. I'm sure you must have heard things similar to this all the time. We all have our own stories. But that is not the correct way of thinking. Because it says in this week's, the first pasuk in this week's parasha, Mikeitz, it was the end, it was the decree. Once the decree happened in Shamayim that Joseph was to be released, Hashem then orchestrated the method for that decree. So what does this teach us? It teaches us that once something is decreed in Shamayim, that let's say a person should die in a certain time, or anything should happen, then Hashem creates these circumstances for that to come about. And the long and the short of it is that nothing we can do can affect that outcome. We can be part of that outcome, but in hindsight, we can't turn around and say, we could have, we should have, we would have. That doesn't occur. Now, again, I have to be very clear about this. It doesn't mean that we should just throw up our hands and do nothing. Because, of course, a person has to do what a person has to do. But once all is said and done, once the decree has come out, you have to realize it happened because it was decreed in Shemayim, and nothing you could have done could have prevented what would have happened. Because if you would have done something and it would have been prevented, then the prevention would have been what was decreed in Shemayim. Yeah? So all these feelings of regret, I could have done more, I should have done more. Now, you can have feelings of regret to help you with going forward. For instance, something happens and you feel you should have been more on the ball. You should have helped the person more. Then you can take on a resolve for the future. I should really try better. That's a totally different outcome, because what that event that happened is saying to you is that now you've heard a message, and you're taking the message and you're taking it forward. Taking it forward is one thing, but regretting about the past you could have prevented, you could not have prevented. So the underlying message here, says the Beis Halevi, is you cannot regret something that happened in the past, but what you should do is take the message forward and help it influence the future. And take it as a message. And we're going to talk about messages a little bit later in the shir. So let's move on. Let's skip out all this bit because we've talked about this in previous shirim. Let's go. We're on Perek Mem Aleph, and we're going to Pasuk Lamed Gimel 33. Va'ata Yeire Faro Ish Navon V'Chacham V'Shitehu Al Eretz Mitzrayim. Now, what happens here? Now, we mentioned Yosef gets schlepped out the pit. They give him a quick shave. They give him a haircut. They give him the whole, the beauty treatment. Now he comes up in front of Pharaoh. He's dressed smart. He's manicured. He looks like $1 million. Then Pharaoh says, "Okay, interpret the dream." Joseph interprets the dream. And then Joseph comes out with a whole speech saying, "You know what, Pharaoh?" And he offers his opinion and he goes on and on. Who asked Joseph to open his mouth and give an opinion? Pharaoh said, "Interpret the dream." It's like, sometimes when people talk between themselves, somebody asks a question and then somebody gives an answer, and then they give more information. They answer the question, then move on to other things, and they don't give somebody, they talk about other things which are irrelevant. It seems like Pharaoh asked Joseph a question, Joseph replied, and then Joseph adds on this whole opinion thing, saying, "You know what? If you were clever, you would appoint somebody who knows what he was doing to take charge when there's going to be 7 years, to take care of the 7 years of famine and all that." Who asked Joseph? Why does he proffer his opinion? He's in the presence of royalty. Pharaoh could have just said, "Excuse me, you're telling me my job?" Pharaoh could have cut his head off there and then. So I'll explain the answer by way of a mashal, by way of a proverb. So there were once two men who were both very wrapped up in their own self-importance. Each one believed he was the bee's knees, as they say in the UK. And it happened that the two of them were in a train station. And when they went into the train station, they saw there was a large band there, like a reception. And when they walked in, suddenly the band started playing, like as if important dignitaries were coming. Now, of course, each one of those two men felt within himself, this whole reception is for me. It must be for me. And the other one thought, no, it's for me. And then they both said to each other, this is for me. And I said, no, it's for me. And they argued with each other. No, it's for me. And you're back and forth, and each one saying, no, you don't understand, you're nothing, it's for me. And they could not come to a consensus as to who this whole reception was. What did they do? They heard there was a Jew who was a poor Jew, but he was somebody who was very wise. And they said, you know what, we'll go to this Jew. He will tell us who this big reception is for. So they went to this Jew. This Jew happened to be very poor. And it happened to be that at that time it was coming up to Pesach. And of course the Jew, because he was impoverished, he was wondering where his next penny is going to come from. Suddenly, these two quasi-important men come into his ramshackle hut, and they say, excuse me, Mr. Jew, we hear that you're able, with your wisdom, to come up with an answer to all sorts of problems. Well, we have a particular problem. We want to know that reception with the band and everything and the music, who is that for? Which one of us is it for? So the Jew being a Jew, he said, I'm happy to give you my opinion for 50 rubles. So the two guys looked at each other. Okay, you know what? Let's go halves. Each one gave 25 rubles to the Jew. And the Jew looked at him and says, you want to know who the reception was for? You want to know who's going to benefit from all that pomp and grandeur? The sole beneficiary of that reception was me, because I now got 50 rubles for Pesach. Thank you very much and goodbye. Now what comes out of this? This Jew knew perfectly what was happening, what was playing out. Because Hashem, obviously this Jew must have prayed to Hashem to help him, with money for Pesach. And Hashem obviously heard his prayer and decreed, you know what? You're going to get 50 rubles. So to execute that judgment, to make that happen, I'm going to put a band in a train station with a big reception and lots of marching drummers and the whole ganze Sprach. And then they're going to get two guys who each one thinks he's the greater one and put them there. And then they're going to come to you. You're going to pay the money. Bob's your uncle. Job done. That is what Yosef knew. Yosef was very, very knowledgeable, and he knew exactly why he was there. So he basically was telling Paro that, all this stuff with the dreams that you've been having, the fat cow, the thin cows, the stalks of wheat, the whole stuff you're having, it's not because of you. It's not for the benefit of your courtiers or your dream interpreters or even Google. It's nothing to do with that. The whole thing with the dreams, it's all for my benefit. Because God decreed I get out of jail. So therefore he orchestrated this whole thing. And therefore, if you want to listen to the message, you will appoint somebody to take this forward. This is only the beginning. That's what Joseph said. This is only the beginning. You want to be part of the problem, or you want to be part of the solution? You want to be part of the solution? You'll appoint a man who knows what he's doing. That was a hint to Pharaoh to put Joseph in the right position. And of course, Hashem put it into Pharaoh's head that he would accept this hint. And he would get the hint and he would get on with it. And that's why Joseph was put in charge almost immediately, which is unbelievable if you think about it. How can that happen? Suddenly, 1 minute, he's a slave boy, and the next minute he's a viceroy. What's going on? If Hashem wants it to happen, it's going to happen, either with you or despite you. Let's move forward a few pasukim, and you'll see now the difference between Pharaoh the Egyptian and Joseph the Jew. Let's move forward to pasuk 41. So pasuk Mem Aleph in Perek Mem Aleph. Vayomer Paro el Yosef, Re'ei natati otcha al kol Eretz Mitzrayim. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I've given before you all of the land of Egypt. Basically, what Pharaoh was saying to Joseph was, I've placed you in charge. You are going to be in charge of the whole of Egypt, answerable only to me. Otherwise, you have free reign. You've got the job. You can get on with it. So why did Pharaoh have to come and speak this whole thing out? Yeah, he already said that. You look at the previous pasuk. Ata tiyeh al beiti v'al picha yishak kol ami rak hakisei egdal mimeka. He said, you're going to be in charge of my palace, and everyone will listen to you. So why did he repeat himself here? You know why he repeated himself here? Because he was telling Joseph something which really indicated what Pharaoh was and who he was, and whatever. You'll see from what I'm going to say. He was saying, all this power and glory that you're getting? Just remember one thing. It's coming from me. I'm the one who put you here. If it wasn't for me, this wouldn't happen. So he was telling Joseph, don't forget who put you where you are. You owe me, big time. You owe me. That's what he was saying. As opposed to Joseph, who all the way down the line always said, whatever happens to me, wherever God puts me, it's all because of Hashem. I'm not a dream interpreter. Hashem is a dream interpreter. I didn't put myself here. Hashem put myself here. Everything is Hashem, Hashem, all the time. Hashem, Hashem, Hashem. Exactly the opposite of Pharaoh, who says it's me. Pharaoh doesn't recognize God. As far as he's concerned, he's the one who's calling the shots. Pharaoh's the one who's calling the shots. You see the difference between Pharaoh and Joseph? Let's move to the next Perek. Perek Mem Beis 42, Pasuk 21. That's Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Vayomru ish el achiv, aval ashemim anachnu al achinu. Now we're going to focus on the brothers. They were talking about the past. They said, we are guilty about our brother. Because now the brothers have come to Egypt. And they're saying to themselves, you know what? All this is happening because we sold our brother. We sold him down the line. That's why this pain and this suffering is coming upon us. They looked within themselves. They pointed the blame fairly and squarely on themselves. But let's take a little bit of a step back. We mentioned that Joseph accepted whatever Hashem gave to him. In fact, when they were throwing in the pits, he was obviously he wouldn't have jumped in himself, but there was only one point when he really was pleading with his brothers. One point when he really went beyond himself and almost, as it were, went down on bending on his knees and started begging for his life. You know when that was? That was the point when he was going to be sold to the Ishmaelim, when he was going to be sold first and foremost. Why was he crying and screaming there and not before? There's opinion that say that he was crying when he was being thrown into the pit, if I'm not mistaken. But really, this is the first time when he really started begging and begging for his life. You know why? Because there's a big difference between being thrown into a pit or being killed, having a death sentence by the Beis Din, and being sold. Because being killed is, you know what? If that's what's going to be, that's what's going to be. But being sold to Arabs, that was a different thing, because that involved being in the presence of people who would not be conducive to Joseph's religious beliefs. Now he was going to be in the company of people who would not be very happy with Joseph doing mitzvahs and keeping the Torah. They would be assimilating. He would be assimilated with these Arabs. There was a risk of assimilation. There was a risk of that Yosef would no longer be able to be over Hashem, to serve Hashem. Now, when that type of influence exists, that's when Joseph started praying for his life. When it turned out that now he was in spiritual danger as opposed to physical danger, that's when he started begging for his life. Because that is something that he could not take. He could take the physical punishment, even at the risk of his own life, but to impinge on his own ruchnius, on his own spiritual endeavors, that is something he could not take. And that is when he put his foot down and started begging. You see how a Jew puts his neshama before his guf. He puts his soul before his body. You see how Yosef HaTzadik is so concerned. If he's going to go down, he's going to go down like a Jew. If he's going to go down, he's going to go down fighting for his own spiritual awareness and spiritual improvement. Now, we're going to carry on with the brother's reaction. Just to fill you in a little bit with the story, let's go forward, same payrek to Pasuk Kaf Zayin. So what happens now? You know this whole thing when Joseph takes the money and he puts the money back into the sacks of the brothers. So what happens? Let's in that Pasuk 27. Where is it? Okay. Vayiftach ha'echad et sako. One of them opened their bag. In fact, ha'echad means the one opened his bag. Latet mispor lachamaro b'malon. He wanted to feed his donkey in the hotel, in the inn. So what happens? He opened his bag and he saw there's this money that he's supposed to have paid to the Egyptian ruler. Now a whole balagan happens. What happens now? Everyone sees there's money, and now Levi starts ranting and raving, and he says, "No, you know this. Why this has happened? Again, this is because of what we happened to our brother, what we did to our brother." And they say, "What is this that Hashem has done to us?" This all happens. They have introspection. The brothers straight away, when something bad happens, they don't point the finger and say, "Oh, you know, they always look to themselves first. What did we do that this evil happens to us?" They always looked at themselves. But who is the one who is the catalyst of this whole balagam, this whole conjecture about the money? It's ha'echad, the one. And we are told that the one refers to one specific brother. And that brother happens to be none other than Levi, the third oldest brother. Levi was the one who raised the alarm. Levi was the one who said, "Look, what is God doing to us? This is because of Joseph." And everyone started crying, and what are we going to do? And it was b'sheret. It was Hashem's will. In fact, through Yosef, that it will be Levi that would open that sack first. Why? You have to understand who Levi was. Levi was the one, not only was he the one who was the quintessential teacher of Torah, because from Levi came all the Levites, of course, and all the Kohanim. The Kohanim who teach Torah, who serve in the Beit HaMikdash. but it also happens to be Levi is the one who stands up for Klal Yisrael. And he comes and he bashes us over the head, not physically, but he bashes us over the head to say, what are you doing? How can you do this? He was the one who stood up in the midbar, in the desert. And after the golden calf, he turned around and he said, Mi Lashem Elai. It was the Levites who said that. Who's going to be for God? He was the one who stood up for Hashem constantly. And that's why it had to be him to find it. Because he was the one who raised the alarm. He's the one who said, oi, what have we done? And now you see, there's a connection to Hanukkah here. What's the connection? Because who was descended from Shevet Levi? Was the Chashmonaim, the Hasmoneans, who were the ones who defended Klal Yisrael. They were the ones who went out to fight with the Greeks. They were all Kohanim, the Chashmonaim. So you see again, they were descended from Levi. They were the ones who stood up for Hashem. Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem. Who will stand up for Hashem? So you see, it was in the genes. From Levi came the Levites in the desert, who came the Kohanim who served in the Beit HaMikdash, came all the teachers of Klal Yisrael, and also came the Chashmonaim. And I'm going to tell you a beautiful vort I heard from my friend Gershi Freilich, who said in the name of his late father, Lavdi ben Chaim HaChaim, who was Rav Yosef Freilich, Rabbi Joseph Freilich. Anyone from Golders Green will know that name immediately. I mean, his name goes further than Golders Green, I should tell you. He was an incredible man. He died about maybe 3 years ago, something like that. He set up an institution called Devar Shalayim, and he was the one who had this. He did these courses for people to pick up the Lashon HaKodesh, pick up the language of the Torah in a very quick way. And he would give like crash courses, and he gave courses in Gemara, and he was an incredible person. He had a lot of fortitude, a lot of strength, and he was an Eved Hashem in many, many ways. And his son Gershi told me that his father, Alav Shalom, used to say this vort, and he wanted me to say it in his father's name. So if we go to Perek Mem Gimel 43, and we go to Pasuk Yud Aleph, something very interesting here, because the brothers come back now. They went back to Yaakov, and now they come back to Egypt because they've got to bring their brother. And Yaakov doesn't send the brothers back alone. He sends them back with gifts to give to the Egyptian ruler. Of course, nobody has any idea, at least not amongst Yaakov's family, that the leader of Egypt happens to be Yosef. So Yaakov sends these gifts. Now, he doesn't want to send any gifts. He doesn't want to say anything that the leader of Egypt could get off the shelf. He wanted to give him something unusual, something, endemic from Canaan. When you go and give somebody a gift, you don't want to give somebody a gift that they can buy in a shop down the road. You want to give them a gift that comes from abroad, or something where they wouldn't normally be able to get it. So Yaakov gives the brothers the following gifts to give to the Egyptian leader. And the pasuk says, Vayoma alehem Yisrael avihem im kain efo zot asu kechul mizimrat haaretz. Zot asu kechul mizimrat haaretz. Take from the best of the land, b'chalahem in your vessels, v'horidu laish mincha ma'at. Give him a little gift. Tzoriu ma'at. What's the gift? Davash, nechot, valot, botnim, ushkedim. As is translated, a bit of balsam, a bit of honey, wax, lotus, which I always thought was a car, pistachios, and almonds. Okay? All these things were special, significant things from Canaan, that if Yosef would have opened these things up, he would have gone, oh, that's nice. I haven't seen these before. All this comes from Canaan. Wonderful, fantastic. But you have to understand what those things were. Because we are told that those gifts that I just mentioned were also, most of those things were in the wagon when Yosef was first brought down to Mitzrayim. Because we said this already. When Yosef was sold down the line and he ended up going to Egypt in a wagon, And the Arabs were in the wagon, the Ishmaelim were in the wagon. They normally carry oil and smelly things, but they happen to be carrying spices. What were the spices? These things here. These things here. Most of these things were among the spices. So now what happens? Picture the scene. Yosef had gone down to Mitzrayim. He'd been smelling this stuff going down. Okay, it might have been sweet smelling, but that aroma of the spices when he was going down to Egypt to be sold into a life of slavery, those smells evoked in him a horrible memory. And now his own brothers were bringing the same spices, the same smells, and now the same memories were coming up in Yosef's brain. You are bringing me the same things that I had gone down to Egypt with? He could have turned around and said, how dare you? You're putting it in my face. You're rubbing it in my face. How could you do such a thing? He could have given the game away there and then. But of course, Yosef said nothing. Even though he might have felt feelings of anger and rage, obviously on his level, but he never said anything. You see, sometimes a color or a smell might evoke a memory. It might be for the good, or it might be for the bad. Very often we can have aromas or smells that can remind us of our childhood. So they do evoke memories. And unfortunately here it was not such a pleasant memory. I'm going to say one more thing. Let's move forward, same perek, and we're going to go to Pasuk Chaf Beit. Now, the brothers were now eating with Joseph. Of course, still, the cat was not out the bag. The brothers did not know, apart from Binyamin, but that's a separate thing. But the brothers were sitting down eating a meal with the Egyptian viceroy. Says the Pasuk 32. V'chesef, where am I? Is that the right Pasuk? No, sorry, it's Lamed Beit. Lamed Beit. Here we go. Vayirchatz panav v'etzei v'etapak v'yomer simu lachem. What happened here? They served him separately, and them separately, and the Egyptians who ate with him separately. Everyone ate separately. Sorry, I quoted the wrong pasuk inside. Vayisimu lo levado, velahem levada, velamitzrim haochlim ito levada, ki lo yochlun hamitzrim lechol et haivrim lechem, ki to'evahi lemitzrayim. Everybody ate separately. The Egyptians ate separately from Joseph, and the brothers ate separately also from the Egyptians. Why was this separation? The answer is, the pasuk tells us that the Egyptians hated the Jews. So now, we have to ask the question. So it appears that the Egyptians knew that Joseph was Jewish. And by extension, we have to say that the Egyptians in Egypt knew that Joseph was Jewish. So the populace of Egypt were well aware that their viceroy was of Jewish descent. Why? Because they never ate together. Because Egyptians just don't eat with Jews. So if this was the case, that Egypt knew that Joseph, or as his Egyptian name was, Tzofnat Paneach, was in fact Jewish, so how come the brothers didn't know? Well, they weren't listening to CNN? They never knew the news? Oh, there's an Egyptian viceroy. And by the way, he comes from a family of Jews. He comes from the family of Hebrews. So everybody knew, but who was in the dark? The brothers of Joseph. How can that be? Sounds very unlikely. You know why? It's quite plainly and quite simply It was the will of Hashem. Because Hashem did not want the brothers to know that Yosef was a Jew. So unlikely though it may be, Hashem decided that they were not to know. And if Hashem decides that the brothers were not to know, then despite all the odds, the Egyptians could have been screaming in the brothers' ears, your ruler is the same religion as you. Maybe they didn't know that he was their brother, obviously. Yeah, they didn't know that, but they knew he was of Jewish descent. They could have told them, excuse me, you've got something in common with our viceroy. You're all Hebrews. But they weren't to know that. And if Hashem says they weren't to know that, it doesn't matter how obvious it was, they weren't to know that. What comes out of that? That if Hashem wants you to know something, you will know it. If it's not besheret, if it's not fate for you to know, you will not know it. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how this can be. I'll get a little bit personal. This is a personal story that I won't go to the whole story, but how I met my wife initially was through somebody who I had known for quite a few years, who was not necessarily a shadchanit. She wasn't a matchmaker, but subsequently she did become a matchmaker, and I'd known her for quite a few years, and my wife had met her 2 weeks previously. Ultimately, while we were engaged and while we were getting to know each other, we started talking about different people that we knew. And it became very obvious that we had a lot of people in common, that we were from the same crowds, that we mixed in the same circles. And it was not until the moment that we met that we actually knew each other existed. Or rather, that we only met when we met. We hadn't seen each other. We never knew each other was. In fact, when I first walked into the room and I mentioned to this lady my name, she said, "Oh, I've heard of you." But she never met me, despite the fact that over the course of several years previously, we'd even been in the same room at the same time. We'd never met each other. We'd never talked to each other. We never bumped into each other. How come? I was in so many places, and my wife, who was not my wife at the time, this was before we got married, was in the same room. In fact, we worked out even once we were introduced. No, nothing happened. Until a while later. Why is that? Because Hashem has a plan. If you were to meet your besheret, the person you're supposed to marry, you're supposed to meet them. When? That's up to Hashem. You could be in the same room with them, talking to them. It's not going to happen. It's only going to happen when Hashem decrees it to happen. And now I'll tell you another story. This story happened many years before this. This is a story of the Imre Emes. The Imre Emes was one of the Gera Rebbes. And what happened was, in the times of the Imre Emes, there was a person who came to him who was recommended a certain shidduch. I believe it was for his daughter. And he asked the Imre Emes about the boy who'd been recommended for his daughter. And the Imre Emes heard what the fellow had to say, and he said, "You know what? If you really want to know about the other family who wants to marry into your family, go to the town where they live, go in the street, pick somebody in the street and say to him, 'Excuse me, do you know so-and-so family?' And then they will give you a recommendation as to what they think. They'll give you an insight into the family." Fine. So the fellow goes to the town where the family of the Chosin was recommended his daughter, and he walks in the street and he finds somebody. He says, "Excuse me, sir, do you know so-and-so who has a son called so-and-so?" He says, "Oh yes, I know them." He says, "Can you tell me a bit about them? Because it happens that," I don't know if he revealed that they were going for a shidduch or something, but he asked him for a reference for the father of the boy who wanted to marry his daughter. So the fellow told him, yes, I know this fellow. He's a fine fellow. I don't, etc. And I like him. He's a nice guy, etc. So based on that, so the fellow who'd asked the recommendation went to meet the other fellow. Again, the fathers met, and the children met, and it was decided that they were going to get married, and the match was made. And I believe that at that point, not long after, the wedding took place. Now, I think shortly afterwards, the father of the bride happened to be somewhere, and the name of his mechutan came up. The father of the groom, his name came up. And everybody had something bad to say about him. Oh, he's a this, he's a that. Da, 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 da. So now this fellow gets very scared. And he thinks to himself, oh my gosh, my daughter just married his son and now everyone's saying something terrible about him. He's a cheat or whatever. So now what happens? The fellow goes back to the Ibrei Emes and he says to him, Rabbi, what have you done to me? You said I should go and ask somebody for recommendation. He's probably the only person who had something positive to say about the father of the groom, and now everyone else has a different bad thing to say about him. The Ibrei Emes says, calm down. He said, you have to realize, I told you to go to the fellow's town and pick somebody in the street. You think that was a random person? Hashem put you in the position where you talk to probably, or maybe, one of the only people who liked this fellow in the whole town. Why was that? Use your brain, said the Ibrei Emes, or words to that effect. Because it was b'shert. It had to be that your daughter had to marry this fellow's son. And if you would have gone and just, theoretically is probably the better word, if you would have walked into the town and heard the word on the street, then maybe your daughter wouldn't have married his son. But obviously that wasn't the case. That wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be that the shidduch would take place. So Hashem orchestrated it that you would meet one of the only people who had something extremely positive to say about your future mechutan. So, in short, what was the Ibrei Emes saying? You can't fight destiny. It had to be. Despite you. It had to be. And that's something we need to get knowing in no uncertain measure. So I'm going to finish off now with a couple of stories. And they happen to be Hanukkah stories. First story is told by Rav Shabsi Relevich. She was a famous Maggid. And this is a true story about Russia in the old days when Jews could not leave Russia. When Russia was like Mitzrayim, Egypt. If you go out, you're not going to go out. You're only going to go out in a body bag. So it happened that there was a fellow called Reb Herschel. And he had heard that there was a certain Gentile who was smuggling human cargo out of Russia. Now, again, you have to understand what life was like in those days in Russia. 100 years ago or something. That if you were caught trying to defect from Mother Russia, then there was no doubt that the soldier who'd caught you would be perfectly within his rights to shoot you there and then. No trial, no jury, straight away to meet the sentence of death on any Jew trying to leave Russia. So, this Gentile, obviously he was going to be paid. He wasn't just smuggling people out for the fun of it. So he was being paid huge amounts of money by people wanting to escape from Russia. And this fellow Herschel decided, I need to speak to this guy and I'm going to pay the money because I've got to get out. I can't be an observant Jew in Russia anymore. I need to leave. So he came to this Gentile and it happened to be the third day of Hanukkah. And the Gentile told him, you want to leave Russia? It's going to cost you. Herschel said, don't worry, I have the money. The Gentile said, okay, you want to come with me? It has to be tonight. So Herschel said, yes, but it's Hanukkah. It's a Jewish festival of light. I have to be home. I have to light, oil lamps. So the Gentile said, no, you want to come? It's got to be tonight. I don't care about you whatever you have to do. Okay, fine. So Shabsi packed his stuff, little things he took with him, and he took his menorah and his oil. And of course, it was an arduous journey. Nobody knew if they were going to live or die, and there was a few people with him. Herschel being the most observant, the other ones were not very observant Jews at all. And they were going through the forest, and any slight sound, any movement could alert the soldiers there. They would have literally just shot them, and that would have been it. End of story. And Herschel said to the Gentile, please, can you give me 2 minutes? I just need to stop to light my lamp here. It's the 4th night of our festival. It's 4 lamps. I light them, and that's it. Well, 5, including the shamas. So the Gentile said, are you crazy? You want to make a light here in the forest? One little glimmer of light and they'll spot us straight away and then we'll all be goners. Forget it, I'm not doing this. You want to do it? Go your own way. So what could he do? Poor Herschel had to go. They carried on. Eventually they came to an old dilapidated house. And the Gentile said to the other Jews, he said, okay, here, we're going to rest here for a while, and then we're going to carry on. So Herschel now saw his opportunity. Everyone was busy with doing their own thing. Herschel went into a corner. He put his back to everybody and he lit the menorah, and he put his back so that he would be covering the light. And he lit, and then people were like, the Jews were looking at him and thinking, what's going on here? Suddenly the door flies open, and in comes a Russian soldier with a rifle. At last I have found you. I have been looking for you all over the forest. So he'd obviously spotted them. And now all of the people, including the Gentile, were looking at Herschel and thinking to themselves, you this and that, whatever. If it wasn't for your lighting that lamp, we would have got away. That's what he saw. So now they were fuming that they were going to die, and they were all looking with dagger eyes at this Herschel. Suddenly the Russian soldier catches sight of the menorah. He says, what is that? So now Herschel had to explain. He says, this is a menorah. We have this on Hanukkah. We light this one light every night on our festival. Then the Russian soldier starts thinking and remembering, and he says, I'm also Jewish, and 25 years ago I was taken into the Russian army, but I remember when I was a young boy, my father used to light one of those things, and we used to sing, and we used to have a thing called a dreidel, and it used to be such a special time, and that's one of the only things I can remember from my home before they snatched me away. And it's bringing back such a happy memory. And of course, that melted the soldier's heart. And he said to everybody, you know what? I'm not going to shoot you. In fact, I'm going to make sure you get out. I'm going to make sure you have safe passage out of Russia. And you see, because of that menorah, it saved everybody's life. But Rav Shamsi Yudlevich, who tells the story, says something very interesting. He says, there's one character in this story who has an incredible zechus, an incredible merit. You know who that is? That's the father of that Russian soldier. Can you imagine? Because of his dedication, because of his love for the mitzvah, because he involved his family in the mitzvah of Hanukkah, and menorah, and the dreidel, and the donuts, and whatever it is. It had such an impression on his son, even though he was 25 years in the Russian army, that he remembered it even way back then after he'd been brainwashed. You see, if a person does a mitzvah with hitlaavut, with enthusiasm, how, you see, that mitzvah for those 8 days saved the lives of those Jews. Saved them from what would have been certain death. So you see, it's so important when we do a mitzvah. We don't know what's going to happen because of that mitzvah. We should do a mitzvah. We should make the mitzvah count and matter to the people who we're involved in. We should radiate our own light through our mitzvot. And the second story, I'll finish with this. It's a famous story, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before, but it's such a powerful story. It's the story of the Blujev Rebbe when he was in the camps. I think it was Treblinka, I'm not 100% sure, where they were, and it happened to be Hanukkah time. And the Blujev Rebbe and his Hasidim, the people, the Jews with him, they found an old shoe, and they got wax, and they made a lamp. They made a light from that, and they basically used whatever scant and scarce commodities they could get their hands on. They made like a makeshift menorah. And it came to the night, the first night of Hanukkah, and the Blujev Rebbe was there. And he made, and of course you make 3 brachot on the first evening. You make, what's it called, Shos HaNisim, and you make L'Haldik Ner Hanukkah, or if you're Ashkenazi, L'Haldik Ner Shel Hanukkah. And the third bracha, which is only said on the first night, is Shechianu. So the Blujev Rebbe makes the first 2 brachas, and he gets to Shechianu, and he can't speak. He's been stuck dumb. And the people looking at him, they're saying, Rebbe, no, it's Shechianu, yes. And what does the bracha of Shechianu mean? Shechianu v'kimon v'yonu zman. Hashem, thank you because you brought us to this moment. And what's going through the Rebbe's mind? Ribono Shalom, I'm saying this in front of these people, that you've brought us to this moment, but look at this moment. People are dying left, right and center. There are dead bodies of Jews all over the place. People are scrapping for food. People are dying of starvation and illness. Ribono Shalom, this is what we're blessing, that you brought us to this moment. And he was thinking, and he was thinking, and he was thinking. And then he made the bracha. So one man went up to the Rebbe afterwards and said, Rebbe, why did you pause before you make the bracha? Was it because you had your doubts about Shechianu? That it really was, a terrible moment that we've been brought to? A moment where there's death everywhere? And the Rebbe said, yes, that's what I had my doubts about. But then I looked at all the people in front of me, and I said to myself, Hashem, you've brought us to this moment. You brought us to the moment where there are people who have been Moser Nefesh. They literally take their lives in their own hands, and they come and they sit under pain of being shot to come and witness the lighting of the menorah. Literally their own lives they would give to perform this mitzvah. And Hashem, you've brought us to this moment, and that's what I'm thanking you for. That there are still Jews out there who believe in mitzvot and believe in the Torah and believe that there's going to be a better time, that there is a better future out there. I don't know when it's going to be, but because of those Jews, that's why I can make the bracha of Shechianu, and that's why I can do it with conviction. What a powerful lesson we learn from this. That no matter what the odds, no matter what mishugas is happening in the world today with ISIS and with all the wars and with the famine and everything, that it's the easiest thing to point the finger at God and blame it on God. But we can still say Shechianu. We can still say, Hashem, you brought us to this moment, because there are still Jews out there in the world today who believe in you, who want for a better future, who believe in a better future. There are still Noachides out there who support what we're doing and who believe in Hashem. And Baruch Hashem, I'm in contact with several of them, and they are nothing less than inspirational. So Baruch Hashem, there is a light, there is a glimmer among all the darkness. And that glimmer is what's going to take us through to the next level. It's what's going to take us through to Mashiach. May he come and may we enjoy the light of Hanukkah with Mashiach Tzidkenu. Not in our homes necessarily, but the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, the Beit Shlishi, the Bin and Ariel, may it happen without any further delay and any further pain. Amen. Have a wonderful, lichtige, fröhlichen Chanukah.